most people think mitigation specialists are there to navigate the waters of witnesses and documents and records, but it sounds like part of your approach is to, if not lightly, grab the attorney by the collar and shake them sometimes and say, dude, get it together.
Yeah, well, and I mean, not in an ugly way, in a really,
I said
and
gently.
yeah, it is gentle. And it's just saying, like, I think that honestly, the courage lies within me to just be able to say, hey, I'm being a mirror and I'm saying these things. And if I wasn't your friend, your colleague, if I wasn't looking out for you, because I know ultimately you want to win. If I'm not looking out for you and whatever that win looks like, I wouldn't say anything.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing.
Hey, everybody, this is Doug Passon, not coming to you from Studio 3553. I'm at home today because we have internet issues, and you might hear some barking dogs and other interruptions, but hopefully we're going to be all good. But enough of that. Let's get to it. Today, helping us get set for sentencing, an incredible guest, a woman by the name of Victoria Rusk. And Victoria is a sentencing mitigation specialist. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that even just the very first episode that we did on Set for Sentencing was about sentencing mitigation. It's just baseline criminal defense for the lawyers that we need to dig for and develop and deliver the most powerful sentencing narrative we can. And mitigation specialists are fundamental to that process. We don't know enough about them. We don't use them enough, and there aren't enough of them in the world. And so I'm so excited to have a great conversation with Victoria Rusk. Now, she is the owner of Heart of Justice LLC, and that is her mitigation company. She's the author of the Handbook for Mitigation. So it's an actual publication that you can buy on her website in print form and digital form. And if you really want, you can get an autographed copy there. I got mine. And also creator of something really cool, an online course called Mitigation to University. So we're going to talk about all of that. But first, welcome, Victoria. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to assume that my listeners haven't listened to the other episodes on mitigation specialists. So we'll start just from the very beginning. What is a mitigation specialist, and why would I ever want or need one in a case?
A mitigation specialist is a particular special type of investigation that's just for sentencing. So it's not the who, the what, the where, the when, or the how. It's the why behind the alleged crime. And so this person, the mitigation specialist, will be assisting the attorney to prepare for sentencing by interviewing the accused, their family, friends, their loved ones, teachers, co-workers, ex-girlfriends, ex-husbands, old neighbors. I mean, depending on the type of case that it is. For capital murder cases, you can interview 100 people, do investigation 3 generations back. So just not the client and their caretakers or their parents, but their grandparents. And really help the attorney, which then helps the decision makers, whether that's a judge, a jury, or a prosecutor, understand how this person got into the circumstances of the crime. And then when you get really juicy into the mitigation investigation, you can figure out the mitigating circumstances of the crime. And then how do you go about presenting that information? Mitigation specialists are the tool to assist an attorney in organizing information for the decision makers. And they are the person with a unique background. My background is in journalism. Other people could be a social worker or even a paralegal or a nurse or a teacher, a philanthropist, nonprofit worker. I mean, there's certain regulation that people want to get into about who's qualified to be a mitigation specialist or not, but I have discussed and trained a variety of different people and help a variety of different people get into this business. So it's the skill set, it's the understanding, social graces, it's emotional intelligence, not just book smart. And so the mitigation specialist is the go-to person for an attorney who says, hey, I have this case and I don't know what to do. And I need to be able to explain, this most fucked up situation. And so the cases that come across my desk are the cases where they're just like, Victoria, I don't know what to do. Please help me. Victoria, like, what would you do in that, scenario? What do you think that I should go and look into and or whatever? And we can talk about, how to break down and or organize just the thought of a mitigation investigation. But
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
answer.
There's a lot to unpack there. And but I think before we do it, what I should have maybe started, well, that's a great overview. And I think if I could, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems in line with kind of the way I sum up my approach to my practice, which is people say, let the punishment fit the crime. I say, let the punishment fit the person.
Yeah, right. Same. We don't mitigate a crime, we mitigate a person.
And so this is what, and I think you refer to it on your website as a whole life approach, that this is putting out, examining their entire life's journey and figuring out what were all the sort of pivot points along the way that changed their story from this direction to that direction, and when things could have zagged, and helps not necessarily, well, not at all to excuse the conduct, but to give it context, to explain the person's not here because they're evil, right. they're a horrible person. You need to look at the whole big picture to figure out how they got to this moment in time. And so you mentioned capital cases, but you work in cap and non-cap too, right?
Yes, I do. A lot of times the death penalty gets waived right fast. And so, because when you get certain mitigating factors investigated and put in the forefront, then the penalty is waived, and then we are now preparing for, a particular type of negotiation for a plea. And sometimes there is just a sentencing hearing.
Yeah, and I think so. Most of the attorneys aren't doing capital. I mean, a lot of people listening are doing capital work, but just in the grand scheme of things, there's this many capital cases, and we do. But what I really love to convey to my attorney listeners or clients or potential people out there is that this is not just about capital. What we are going to learn a lot from the way capital lawyers handled their approach, because it's mitigation from day one, the minute the file hits their desk, and it's mitigation designed first and foremost to get the death penalty off the table. And we in non-capital world, a lot of times it's like, well, let's just figure out the crime and let's just negotiate a plea, and then once we clear that hurdle, we'll start thinking about sentencing. And people don't realize that if you get in early and do a thorough mitigation workup, like a capital case, that can change the entire trajectory of your case in plea negotiations, even in bond. There's a million ways that mitigation is necessary early. But this is your hour, not mine. So let's put it back to you. Tell me, I'm a storyteller, and I love origin stories. And I often ask my guests what is your origin story? How do you get from here to there in Heart of Justice?
Well, I worked for a regional public defender's office that was just for capital cases, and that's how I got into the business. And I was hired because of my journalism background, my writing capabilities, and my humanitarian work.
Yeah,
Um,
so tell me about journalism background and any other sort of life experience that you had under your belt before you got into the mitigation world.
my I went to school for public relations, but that didn't necessarily matter at the time because I was working for a TV station, and my news director told me like, Victoria, you can get your degree in journalism, but you really need to broaden your horizon or the ability for you to be able to get a job. And I was the first person in my family to go to college, so I really needed to look towards my mentors or my boss at work to help guide me. And because really I in high school I wasn't getting the counseling that you think uh, a high school student would, because I wasn't the type of student, and or my parents weren't involved in the school. And so I come from a working class family, and so the idea of college wasn't something that I could really grasp. But I started community college, and then my professor introduced me to a news director where I applied for a job, and I started broadcast journalism. And by the time I was 19, I was producing and writing full time the weekend newscast in Lubbock, Texas. And I love that job, and I had that all through college. So I was working on my career while I was in college, and so even some of my big writing projects that I had for my PR degree were so easy because I was writing every single day for work. And so that's how I got into, just understanding how to organize information. And I really used that skill as a mitigation specialist in preparing for trial and creating what I call a trial rundown. I utilize my skill set from TV news because you are writing for the ear when you're a newscaster or a they're reading the news.
Yeah.
And because people are listening, right? And so that's the same as thinking about a jury or how you're going to organize the information of like what's important or what goes next and how things are going to flow. And then getting into the business of mitigation specialist, I had a friend who was a professor and a lawyer, and he said, "Hey, I know about this job, and I think you would do really good." And it was, after 2008 and the economic crisis that came, and my PR job just went flat because that was really a luxurious job for an organization to have. And so I got into mitigation that way, and it was on the job training, which is basically what I think a lot of mitigation specialists go about doing it, especially back then in 2011, 2012. And so I learned as I go. And, I worked for the office for about 2 years, and then I broke off and I started my own business. And my really good friend, who is a federal attorney, he gave me the name Heart of Justice. And so I took that and got the LLC and on to the next thing. And then I was probably a mitigation specialist for about 5 years whenever I decided to create the online course, Mitigation University, because I knew that, there's a lot of cases and there's not a lot of us. And so what do you do next? Well, I tried to, employ people, mentor people, and it was just falling through. And so to me, a course was the next best thing. And so I kind of needed to learn a new way of learning or doing things to become what they called an infopreneur. And, studied or went to these different kind of seminars and learned how to organize information in that way to have such course. And so I published that in 2017. And in 2020, during the pandemic, I wrote the book and self-published it. And now there's about 800 copies floating around.
That's awesome. And the course is primarily for people who are trying to become mitigation specialists to train them. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's been seasoned mitigation specialists take the course. I had several beta students in the beginning who were seasoned and told me that they learned something new. And, and I've had people purchase and go through the course just to see what am I doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's should be focused on someone who has, 2 to 5 cases, because I don't cover the basics. That's something that you can get at a seminar, a few seminars, and or you learn as you go, or a paralegal or your attorney or whatever. You can kind of learn how to do records collection. Now, digesting is a skill set, and that might be a hurdle. But in the course of the course, you have 3 consultations and coaching sessions with me, so we can cover whatever you want to cover. So for that course, you're getting, a good introduction and some coaching and some help, and let me meet you where you are so that we will talk about the case that you're working on, or cases that you're working on, how to prioritize things, how to get you paid, taxes, how to investigate different things, how to organize information. I mean, I'm setting up this business so that way I'm utilized, and then you don't need me anymore. You'll go do your own thing.
Nice. So it strikes me as having a journalism background. There's another component to this. I mean, you talk about writing for the ear, but if you're on broadcast news, there's a visual storytelling aspect. But just in general, like, these are stories, news stories. We call them news stories. So what did you learn about storytelling and narrative in your journey, and how do you apply it to the work that you do?
Well, when you're writing a news story, you're writing for the most important information first. And so then when we think about a decision maker or people who want to know, even ourselves, whenever we take on a case, we're like, why did this happen? And we think, what could those top things be? But in writing newscast story, let's say you always start with the most important information and then you back it up just like a little bit more. And I can say that I apply that in different ways, maybe in my mitigation reports. What are the top mitigation themes? Because let's face it, there can be several. And so what are the top ones that actually have some universal value that a lot of people can connect to?
Can you give me some examples of some of those themes?
Yeah, like, I think that we all can identify with loss. I think we can all identify with a level of betrayal. But I take it a little bit further, and I encourage people to take it a little bit further, because it's, first it's just me and the attorney, it's the team. So really seeing where that attorney, themes in that attorney's life and what he or she identifies with. What are the universal themes that she's learned or he's learned in their life that like bridges a connection with the client. So, one that I think everybody goes through, that I'm going through right now in my life, is man versus spirit. We can have a certain amount of, we're doing the best that we can at life, whatever that is. And it throws us a curveball. We're under a lot of stress. We're trying to figure out the next best thing, not just for us, but for our families. And then, we hit a brick wall. And under that amount of stress, under that, depending on where you are with your brain health, how you make certain decisions or choices and how they come. And so even though, it might not, mine or the lawyers doesn't really touch or doesn't become like a criminal act, it's really the circumstance. And so then when we're thinking about our client and how they got themselves into a predicament or a circumstance, they still are having their own struggle within themselves, depending on what the situation was or is. And I'm trying to think of a specific case in particular to assist with that. The one that's coming up right now that I think about is just, being raised by a step parent. I too raised by step parents, by several parents. And the case that I was working on was where I needed to build the best relationship that I could for everybody to testify, because we were going to trial. And death was on the table, and my client wasn't gonna budge, so we're going to trial. And being raised by a step parent, I think, is a part of the theme. Also, the abusive household, whether that's physically or mentally, and then learning how stepdad came to those choices and decisions because of how he was raised. And then, I think and I do believe that the level of rapport and respect, dignity, trust assisted him in his courage to get on the stand and share with the court that he beat his wife because if she stayed in the relationship, he knew she loved him.
Mm. Wow.
And that ain't nothing short but a miracle for him to come to that conclusion and want to help and assist in such a real way. And it is appalling for people, but that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the story is a story is a story. I mean, I can't make that up. Those
Right.
are the things that he said, because as a mitigation specialist, I don't interview people directly. I'm listening.
Yeah.
And they're telling me their truth. They're telling me their story. And as a good listener, I start to see and connect the dots and what, could connect with other people.
Yeah.
And I write about this in the book because I give real life examples. And but to me, that was really miraculous that he were to be so bold and to say that. And then the attorney was just like, whoa. And then I think that the jury was looking like, I can't believe, but the backstory is that all the time that we spent together and learning and meeting people where they are, going to their homes, getting on their schedule, he actually lived an hour away from Houston. So it wasn't like it was easy to get there, and we did have to plan. And it didn't mean that he didn't love his wife and that he didn't love his son, because he did and still does.
Yeah.
And showed up to court because of love.
Yeah.
And then let's take it a little bit further. My client's mom is sitting there being like, this man is telling the truth, and I feel seen and heard. And then when she gets to get on the stand, because how we organized it in the trial rundown, how the flow of the story was going to go, I was nervous about her sharing and showing. And I'm nervous about the attorneys, doing it right. Like, I'm like, oh gosh. And as much as we, help and support, once we're in trial, it's the lawyer show. And so when she gets on and she's sharing what she's been through, and I'm nervous because I don't want her to be re-traumatized, even though it's years and years later. This is a big theme and why my client had such anxiety as a young adult, as a child, and then in his adult years, and his life would be so quick to get into it and or to defend himself and or get into a really hairy circumstance where 3 people were killed. So she's sharing what she'd been through. And the miracle is that the next day when I see her at court and I say, hey, how are you doing? How are things? Are you okay? From yesterday, like, if you want to chat, I'm here to talk. I want to, give you opportunity. She was like, you know what? I feel fine. I feel great. I thought I was scared that this was going to be really scary, but you know what? This was therapeutic, I think. I have already worked through so many things, with her relationship with God, and I was, ready and there, and I did it. And she was like, but, all those people were listening to me.
Yeah.
And that's a really healing process. And I, lose it, because this level of understanding, compassion, and full circle moment is probably the most thing that can, bring some very truthful, emotional tears from me. And I'm like, wow, okay, this is so cool that she was able to have that full circle moment, and she tells me that it was healing, and she shares with me that this was a part of her own process, and that she's glad that she did, and she feels fine, and she doesn't feel hurt anymore, and that everybody got to hear and witness her.
And let it not be lost on people who are listening that these are like the darkest moments, the darkest waters that we swim in, and the most stressful moments in trial, and the highest stakes of life. And you still are able to find hope and light in these dark, dark moments. And those are the things we have to be looking for, lest the decision makers just see the darkness. There's always hope there. You said, so there's so much, again, there's a great story. Love it. I think also I want to emphasize the fact that you're really doing a direct line between all of these life moments and important story points to the crime, to give the crime context, because a lot of people think this is just poor me stuff. This is just sympathy. This is just feel sorry for me because I was beaten by my stepdad, and feel sorry for me because I was homeless, or whatever it is. And it's not about feel sorry for me. It's not about sympathy. It's about empathy. It's about step out of your own world, which in my world with lawyers and judges, prosecutors, it's usually pretty comfortable. I mean, everyone comes with their own story and their own challenge, their own adversity, but we don't live the same lives. We don't have the same educational backgrounds. There's a disconnect, and our job is to build the connection, and say, wow, okay, now I see if I had gone through these things too, I might have and reacted the same way or done the same thing. Now I start to understand. It's not that I feel it's bad for you. In fact, I think that those sympathy points actually build a bigger wall sometimes, because it's like, it sucks to be you, but I'm looking away from this car crash. But you talk, so first of all, you talk about listening, which I think if you listen to some of my narrative episodes, just straight storytelling, we emphasize that narrative is listening first and foremost, because and lawyers are the worst at this because we're really busy and we're taught all wrong in law school. Like, let's just flip to that police report open and let's get to these facts and everything else. And it's like, I'm not hearing you. I'm not seeing you. I'm not asking about your life, your story, your history. I'm not even asking, like, what are you really good at? What do you love? What makes your heart sing? Because those are the things that reveal the humanity of our clients, right? Oh my God, you play an instrument, or you groom dogs, like whatever it is. We don't do that. We're not good listeners. And I guess I would implore attorneys to do better, but I understand we're busy. That's why mitigation specialists are so crucial, because you are our front line, like liaison on the battlefield, to where you are actually sitting there in the living room for hours on end. Like when I do sentencing mitigation videos, usually I'm kind of coming into the case later, and it's maybe a capital case or whatever, and I'm meeting these witnesses sometimes for the first time, and not pulling a camera on them the first time I meet them, but but the person that's introducing me is always the mitigation specialist, and it's usually like with hugs. And like you could tell that they've known these folks for years. They know intimate details of their lives. They are trusted. Nobody trusts attorneys ever. And you can't build that relationship without trust.
We build bridges between the witnesses and the attorney, the client and the attorney, the client and the expert. And sometimes we build the bridges between the expert and the attorney because they don't speak the same language. And then eventually the attorney, once they have the information and the tools, and I don't care how much hand-holding there is, it is as a mitigation specialist, your prerogative with the attorney to decide how far you're going to, how strong you're going to build that bridge, how much hand-holding you're going to do when it comes to the information and doing the thing. And, to me, this is how I navigated my business, to where I'm only working with the attorneys who can pick up what I'm putting down. So there was time in my career where I was just like, okay, everybody's getting an opportunity that I'm going to work really hard and show them this and help them with that and ask them to do these things that they've never done before, like visit your client. You wouldn't think that that was a thing, but it is a thing that, so I would say, hey, will you come to the jail with me? Okay, not today. All right, well, next time, let's look on your schedule and let's get it done where you can do it on your schedule, because you are going to be the one sitting next to this person. And so if you can't and or be comfortable, don't think that the jury ain't going to see that. That you're not even comfortable sitting next to them, and or you have to get there, and so let me help you, let me come pick you up, right? And or it could be that the attorney has, that's not the problem. The attorney is actually just trying to get comfortable with the subject matter of the crime or the subject matter of the mitigation.
Yeah.
And so we need to assist and help them walk through some of that stuff, so that way whenever they're standing up and trial and they really are doing the best that they can, helping them to figure out, and just not being scared to just say, look, this is making you cringe. That is okay. I'm not mad at you. Cringe here in the office, but let's get over it. So what's going on? Because if my client can sit here and tell me how they lost their virginity, and I'm sharing and I'm mirroring, interviewing, then you can sit down and you can tell me some of the other deep stuff that you have going on, because you're getting fucked with, you're getting triggered, and we need to clear that here in the office right now, because you can't do it in front of the jury. You're going to look suspect. You're going to look, guilty, or you're going to look, you're going to look uncomfortable, and they're not going to know what it is. And if you don't really have the courage to say what it is, like, this is a subject matter that is bothersome for me, so I'm working through this, whatever it is, then you're robbing your client of something, because you're not wanting to do your own, work. And some attorneys are like, I'm not going to do that emotional stuff. And I'm like, all right, cool. But I did bring it to the table. And whenever you get in front of the jury, when you're doing your job, you'll remember this day and you'll wish that you would have done some work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a real hard time wrapping my mind around the kind of dispassion, disconnected model of lawyering, which again is pretty much how they teach us in law school. So I don't fault lawyers for that approach, because we're taught to be analytical, we're taught to be clinical, we're not taught to be touchy-feely. But if you don't care and you're not projecting that you care to the decision makers, why would you expect them to care?
Exactly.
And then the other aspect is it's a defense mechanism. Sometimes we don't want to get emotionally invested, because we know at the end of the day, our soul's going to be crushed when they lead our client off to jail. And we want to distance ourselves and we want to be dispassionate. It's a self-preservation mechanism, because this job, as you well know, can eat you up from the inside if you let it. And so that's a fine line you have to walk. But it sounds like part of your job. Most people think mitigation specialists are there to navigate the waters of witnesses and documents and records, but it sounds like part of your approach is to, if not lightly, grab the attorney by the collar and shake them sometimes and say, dude, get it together.
Yeah, well, and I mean, not in an ugly way, in a really,
I said gently.
Yeah, it is gentle. And it's just saying, like, I think that honestly, the courage lies within me to just be able to say, hey, I'm being a mirror and I'm seeing these things. And if I wasn't your friend, your colleague, if I wasn't looking out for you, because I know ultimately you want to win. If I'm not looking out for you, and whatever that win looks like, I wouldn't say anything. I just stay and, just let you do whatever it is that you don't do. But I mean, this is what holistic criminal defense looks like. It's that everybody's getting mitigation, even the judge, even the jurors that we don't even know who they are. Because when you think of universal themes, that's what it is. It's universal. It's so that all the decision makers can come to the conclusion that you want them to come to. So you do your full mitigation investigation. You've interviewed the people. You've looked at the records. You've created this, badass chronology. You start seeing this and that. You even do a chronology on, the mother, and then you have this awesome, family tree and you've done like, I don't know what, but you've done all the things. You got the experts, you got all that kind of stuff. Well, then only until then that you've done, 400 hours, let's say in a capital murder case, maybe you get 50 or 60 in a non-cap. It just depends on, how you're working that angle.
Yeah.
Then you start to look and figure out what the universal themes are. You start to think of like, if this was a movie or a sitcom or whatever, like, how you do with your video, you can like, kind of see like, oh, this is where I would start organizing the information and this is what it is. And you have all this evidence, you have the storylines, who's going to say what. And then you start to figure out, oh, okay, this is how, this is what a stranger would perhaps be able to connect with, because, not everybody has been abused by their stepdad, but they have perhaps been abandoned emotionally by a parent, by a lover, by a job. They have had this level of betrayal or misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How heartbreaking is it to whenever you're misunderstood?
Right. So you're tapping into deep, universal life experience and emotions.
Yeah, very broad and very general, because anybody can touch it.
Yeah.
And then it's the little micro examples through a witness or two.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it connects.
Love it. And I love that you used the word holistic. I don't think anybody has ever used that word in any of the discussions I've had in doing this podcast. And nor have I ever heard that. I don't know that I can't recall ever hearing that word used in the context of lawyering. We hear it all the time in medicine, holistic medicine. I think it's really is high time. Well, I love your approach, and I think it's high time that we start using that word regularly, because that is how we win. And I'll put it in air quotes because winning means a lot of different things, but that is how we win cases. And guess what? Even when we don't win or get the result that we want, if we've done that work, the holistic approach, and people have been heard and they were able to tell their stories, they still walk out, in my experience, with their head held high because they know that you gave it everything.
Yes. And that is integrity. That is what integrity is. And when you're in a courtroom and you're going, toe to toe with the prosecutor, you don't know what the decision makers are looking at, but you can tell who's in integrity and who's not in integrity, because we as the defense, we start at negative. We're not even at zero. We're at negative. And we go into the courtroom and we're trying to get to zero. And if we can get to zero and we can hold the line, the prosecutor knows it and feels it. And you can tell when they start acting overzealous.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh, they're getting desperate now.
Mm-hmm.
But you just hold it at zero. And if you get to one, if you get to get above, right? Like you get the jury to laugh or something.
Yes.
Like you get them in like their emotions a little bit or whatever that could look like.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
I did a sentencing video on a capital case, and there was one particular witness in there. And he was a foster brother of our client, and he's big guy, burly beard, but he was a teddy bear guy. And anytime he came on screen, one or two jurors I would look at when they were watching it, and they'd light up. They'd smile, and I'm like, we're in a death penalty case, and these jurors are lighting up. Like something's happening here.
Right. Tell you what, they're laughing, then they're crying. It's like in the same thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. So substantively, when we were prepping for this call, you laid some cool knowledge on me that I want you to see if you can do here, which is about people who hurt people, and that there's really only, I think you said, 4 different stories behind that story of when someone does something so troubling from the outside perspective that lands them charged with a major crime. So tell me about people who hurt people.
Mm-hmm. So this is the deal. I know what you're asking. So when you're doing your mitigation investigation, friends, when you're doing your mitigation investigation, you are listening for head injury, intellectual disability, mental health, behavioral disorder. Okay. Everyone in the Harris County Jail right now is going to fit there.
Say it again, just for
90%
emphasis.
of the time. Head injury, traumatic brain injury, intellectual disability, mental health, behavioral disorder. And how do you investigate those? How do you know the difference between head injury and mental health? What if they have both? How do you know the difference between a mental illness and a behavioral disorder? How does that touch the brain differently? How does it manifest? One somebody's born with and one somebody cultivates through their life, and or they have it in their genes, they're predisposed to such thing could happen because grandpa and Uncle Timmy also have said mental illness. And then stress happens so heavy on the brain that it, turns it on. Mm-hmm. Now there's a lot of technical terms. And if you want to bring out a PowerPoint, I'm way better at doing a presentation on such things. But just in conversation, those are the things. So you need to know, how do you investigate those in a way where you're gathering the information in the most truthful way, because that's what the witness and or whoever is going to write the affidavit for. You get your handy dandy DSM and you learn and you read and you get some textbook clues. But what, our witnesses, our clients' family members, their loved ones, they're not going to say it in these words. They're going to say like, man, he was stupid. Or, like, yes, after I remember that time at, blah, blah, barbecue, da, 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 somebody popped off this and that. And then he went crazy.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you're paying attention and you're listening to those things, and you are gathering information as it is unfolding to you as the gifts that they are, which you can gain in having the strong rapport, having a great atmosphere for disclosure. You have to create those things over multiple interviews. And then that information is coming out, and you've already done your book work. You've already read a cool book on, antisocial, blah, 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 or you've already learned so much about autism because of your own life experience or what you read in the DSM or this seminar that you went to. So you're getting a lot of context, but then the actual clues and the words that people are going to say is how they're going to speak on the stand. Then you have your expert who's going to bring in, the research and connect those dots. But those four things, and understanding how to know the difference between them and then how they actually manifest, right? So, one example is TBI. Always in TBI, as far as I know, in my experience, there is a before TBI and there is after TBI story. So you have two different stories and you have different witnesses. Sometimes you have the same witness for the before and the after. Yep. And then hopefully you have the records, but you might not have records because a certain population of human beings don't get care, and or they go to get care and they get refused care and they get ignored because nobody is, paying attention, and or most human beings, most systems are not poverty informed.
Yeah.
So they're not, you're not getting that, but you might get some records saying that they went and this is what happened. But then on the job, you interview Tom, Dick, and Harry, and they say exactly what happened, that a brick fell on him and that he wasn't the same after that.
Yeah.
And that's the story and how it goes. And those are the witnesses and the tender love and care and rapport that you're building within that community, right? Within those people, and letting them know. And then you're putting them on. You're allowing them to know that you're sharing this could really mean life or death for this person. You're sharing this is going to give information. If you would write this affidavit, it would be so helpful to the decision maker and like where we're moving forward. Yeah. Sometimes we can't, justice doesn't look, like this. They probably are going to still go to prison for some time, but it's important that they know that this is kind of how this went. And the attorney needs to know these kinds of things so that they can get there. And then I promise you, when the attorney really has some certain amount of like solution or understanding or like storyline, then some of their weird jaded attitude just disappears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so it suggests to me that I mean, I think it's probably pro forma in a capital case that evaluations are happening. They're happening up front. They better be. But it's not. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time in non-capital cases, but we get a lot of serious crimes that could land people in prison for many, many years, and from some kind of physical assault to down to super bad frauds. And I think your theory about the four things probably aren't just about people who hurt people. It's about people who make really, really fucked up choices that land them in major, major hot water. And
power dynamics.
Yeah.
Power dynamics in relationships. I mean, this is a fundamental thing that all mitigation specialists should be so interested in to understand.
Tell me more about power dynamics. What do you mean by that?
Their own power dynamics. How did I see my mom and dad interacting? How did they get through their divorce? What effect did that have on me? Who was the authorities in my life? How did they navigate that? When did I feel safe? When did I not feel safe? How did I establish boundaries? 6, 7, 10, 15 years old. How did I understand those things? Like when we understand those things for ourselves, then we can, reflect on what we're learning about someone else. And so, like the major fraud, sex cases, this is all about power dynamics. And understanding where they're healthy helps us to see where then they're not healthy. And I mean, there's so many, like books, podcasts, whatever. Those things, you can reference them, I guess. It could help you. But I just want to say in a mitigation investigation, you have to have the witnesses and the records. But first, you have to have the foundation. You need to work on the horse, as they say, and like get yourself strong and knowledgeable and ready. And then when you see the things that you see, or when you're, interviewing and you're talking to folks and you're listening and you're hearing these things, where to connect the dots and then what to do next. So, in sex cases, for example, these are power dynamics. And we don't always realize where we have lost our power, whether it's within a job, because that could be it, whether it's in our personal relationship with our spouse, and then how we go about making choices or decisions later on when we get ourselves, into a pickle. Not everything is criminal, but shit, when it is, it is. And so, how do we understand better people who sexually offend?
Yeah.
And why or where is that coming from? And a lot of times it's coming from some of our, primary relationships or those first things that are happening in our lives. And when it comes around sex at times, yes, in certain sex cases, you should look how and reveal how, figure out how you learn about their first sexual encounters.
Yeah.
Where did they lose the innocence? Where did they step into and or, like figure those things out? Mm-hmm. Whether it's like what sex is, what feels good, where the desire is, because I mean, I don't know how else to say. I mean, we're on a podcast, so I'm trying my best to keep it conversational, but it's like, when I'm talking to investigators, mitigation specialists, lawyers about this subject matter in particular, the conversation comes up as like, just an example. So, how do you learn about your own, what turns you on or what, how do you get these desires? How is this desire cultivated for yourself? And then just for human beings in general. And then there's a healthy way and there's ways that are not healthy, but they're not bad or wrong. And then later on, when you're really discovering more about your sexuality, and that can be whenever you're in your 20s, but shit, it can be whenever you're in your 50s and your 60s.
Yep.
that you're really having a better understanding of your sexuality, that then you see or you connect the dots back. And so but nobody is doing that kind of investigation unless something went terribly wrong and now there's a criminal case here.
Mm-hmm.
But it really can be that innocent and that understanding. And it
Mm-hmm.
does, and people are like, oh, well, just because you were molested or, hurt in some form or fashion, that doesn't mean that you're going to go and offend. And I'm like, yeah, of course. But what if you had an overbearing parent?
Yep.
What if you got shipped off to, military school, and that's all fine and dandy, and that power dynamic actually really helps you to become like a colonel in the military?
Yeah.
And
It
then,
makes me think of a child porn case that I had, where my client was addicted to child pornography. So not a good thing, very illegal, a lot of trouble, terrible trouble. And then it comes out that when he's 10 years old, he's sexually abused by an older boy in the neighborhood. And interesting, because power dynamic, the prosecutor wanted to say, well, the boy was only like 2 years older than him or something. So this wasn't a case of sexual abuse. It was just two kids experimenting sexually. So you're just trying to play the victim card here. But of course, we had a psychologist talking about the power dynamic and how one person was directing it and controlling it and manipulating it, and how the trauma effects that were manifesting at the time to show that our client didn't want this and was hurt by it, right?
yeah,
But what it really does is this idea of hurt people, the mental health implications that he carried with him with trauma. Because what they say is, it's like the returning to the scene of the crime is what our expert called it. It's like you have to come back to these traumatic events in your life to try to reconcile them in your own mind and master them and control the trauma. And so for him, it was viewing images of children engaged in sexual activity who were about the same age as he was when he was molested by the neighbor.
yeah,
And all of a sudden it's put into a very different light. And guess what? When you're acting out this trauma and you have this addiction, you don't get to get help for that. Because what do? Go to a shrink and say, I've got a computer full of child pornography? So it's a secret you're going to carry around until you get caught, and the justice system's going to unload on you a dump truck of charges and years in prison, and you're left with what? You're only left with the truth of your trauma and your story. The other thing I think about is my clients, who I love my clients and I get along for the most part. I could count on one hand the amount of clients who I just didn't really like as people, but or that I thought were, just a little too far gone for my liking, but really one hand. And I've been doing this 26 years and 1,000 clients. I love them all, but we've all had clients who are super difficult. And our first reaction is, what a fucking asshole. And like, they're just not a nice person, and they're just so hard to deal with, and they argue about every little thing. And then of course you don't want to go see them because you're dreading it, and then they're just kind of lost in languaging. But the lesson I learned is, when you have that client, that's your first clue that you need to do an evaluation, because there's something else going on, because it's not just about people are assholes or bad people. It's just like people on the autism spectrum. If you don't know them and know their challenges, you're like, well, they're weird, or they won't make eye contact. They're hiding something, they're rude. They're so direct. They're so blunt. Why would they say something like that to me? They're just bad people. No, something's up in their brain, period. And if you don't get your mind around that as a lawyer on every single case that you're working on, you're likely missing the boat on a lot of things.
yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I think that's so natural for a mitigation specialist to get their brain around that. I mean, for me in particular, I never really had a client. I mean, I've had clients try to sabotage themselves and like use me to sabotage themselves. But I mean, game recognizes game. I feel like how you're talking about these clients. I feel like that about attorneys. And I'm just like, oh my God, that fool calls me sweetie one more time.
We're a complex breed. We really are. And we're a broken breed. And
Right.
I don't think we come to this job broken, although sometimes we're attracted to it. But no, I think this job breaks us. That's why alcoholism, suicide, um, just mean, angry people sometimes. And that's another thing we do not stress is self-care. We don't talk about that much we're starting to now, thankfully, in the legal community. But I can count on two hands the amount of lawyers I've lost along the way by their own hand, or by strokes, or by aneurysms, or by ODs, or drinking themselves to death.
Yes.
It's
Those,
not an easy job. Yours is
right.
not an easy job. It's vicarious trauma
Mhm.
is what it is. You're internalizing all these dark things.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's caught up with me. Compassion fatigue is a real thing.
Yeah.
Um, Times where, just having to take a real serious break, and that's where the creative projects come from.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a great writer when I'm depressed. And so that's part of, my understanding, of self, and like knowing when to hold and knowing when to fold, and just being honest with the teams that I've worked on. I've had to get off cases before because my depression was so serious that I couldn't travel. I had to regain my energy, and that too is a discussion within itself, and it just helps us as professionals to humanize each other in that moment. And so even having some of that leeway, that I shared, hey, this is what's happening with me. Like, I thought that I would just be able to take some downtime and I would be okay and I would be able to return. I'm not going to be able to. And I need to find another mitigation specialist who is going to be able to do the work for you.
Yeah.
But it's like, I've never, ever got myself in a pickle, thank goodness, to where I couldn't find somebody in a timely way to replace me. Now, what they did after me and how that work got done or didn't get done. But I mean, I set them up to win from the very beginning because I'm being as proactive as I can be, and not everyone, can be that way. And I still even experience a little bit of shame in those cases that I had to forfeit. And even though they had, my work product, and they still had my support, because I would call those witnesses or write the client
Yeah.
and say, hey, this is what's going on and how it is, and just to humanize myself.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they fall through the cracks, and not everyone gets to um experience the, like, all you can be, Victoria or whatever, right? But I mean, you just have to do the next best thing that you can for yourself. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, say that.
And that's courageous to recognize that and be able to act on it and know when your boundaries are, because then you live to fight another day, you know. Um, well, so let's shift this conversation back to a sort of our origin story, I think, because I've been stalking you, for lack of a better term, on like LinkedIn and stuff. So, well, your posts always come across, but a couple weeks ago was the Elizabeth Holmes sentencing, and I wish I had the post in front of me, but it was so on point and kind of hilarious. But it was basically like you looked at the sentencing result in Elizabeth Holmes and said, I'm going to paraphrase you, but it was basically like, if I was a mitigation specialist on that case, she wouldn't have gotten 11.25 years. And I had just done a podcast about the sentencing, and I was sort of, so from a distance, because I don't know what I don't know, and I always like to give lawyers a benefit of the doubt, but it felt like there was something, just based on the pleadings and things I was thinking about in the case, there was maybe a disconnect from in the mitigation world. So I would say, like, what I would love to hear your more specific thoughts on that. And where would Elizabeth Holmes be today with Victoria Rusk as her mitigation specialist?
You never know what the decision makers are going to do, but I think that's one of the things that came to mind whenever I saw her sentence. And then I read the article by the attorney saying what the strategy was. And I was disappointed in his strategy because I thought, like, she's been a good person, she's cooperated, throughout this, and la-di-da, like, nobody's going to pat you on the back for the shit you're supposed to do. And we really want to know the real why behind it. And why aren't you bringing that to the table? So to me, the thing that would stop it is that the lawyer didn't have the mitigation muscle and hadn't been flexing on it, which is the story for a lot of people. And, that's skills, that's preparation, that's just, understanding. And then you're going to take this case and either not get the help or not, set yourself up to win in the best case scenario. And then the other thing is just having a challenging client. Perhaps, Miss Holmes is, would have been a very challenging client because she's white, she's pretty, she's privileged, she has all this education, even though she didn't finish her, degree at Stanford, she got there. She's smart, she knows more than you, like some of the things that can come up. And it's just about, having that walkaway power. So I think that, and whenever I've been invited to cases that some of these are the dynamics with the client, I share what it is that we need to do and why we need to do it. And then I always have the walkaway, power.
Yeah.
Like, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it the professional mitigation way. You want the results that you want, we have to do the work. We have to restore integrity with yourself, with your relationships, with your thought process, and get that clear with the attorney. And I don't know how that's going to look specifically to, this client or any client. I'm following my heart and we'll figure it out as we go. But I am going to be clear and in integrity with myself that if I think of something that we're supposed to do or talk about or understand, we're going to explore it 100%. Because how much is it worth to you, Ms. Holmes, to be in prison for 1 year? Okay. And so it's like, oh, I don't want to go at all, or maybe I could do 3 years. I don't know, but I don't want to go at all. Okay. Well, then you have to do the work now.
Yeah.
You have to figure out, well, how did integrity get out of order within yourself, Ms. Holmes? Within whatever relationship that you downloaded these thoughts, ideas, beliefs, or behavior patterns. And how are we going to iron that out so that somebody gives a fuck? Because you have done, betrayed, for less than better word, lied, all these people and all this money. And so how do we restore integrity within yourself and within this defense team that we're going to be able to go into battle for you? And so the attorney he couldn't have done certain or had certain conversations and or had a healthy power dynamic with, like, you have hired me to represent you, so my strategy is what we're going to use. Otherwise, you're going to represent yourself, because that is the power that you invested in me to be your representative.
And you would have bonded with her and spent the time and cracked her open and gotten peeled back the layers and gotten her. I mean, I would love to have been a fly in the wall. Like, if the attorneys did say, we need to do this, we need to explore this, you maybe have this diagnosis, we need to make sure, and to see how much pushback she was giving them to say, well, we're not doing that. I'm not going to go down that road. I don't want to portray myself in this way.
What are the missed opportunities in your life? Because, man, you are a brilliant woman. And you did have such a wonderful avenue, and you had such lovely connections with a president, with with funders, with investors. You had these things really going for yourself, and I want to bring that level of charisma into this trial. I want to bring that understanding of who you are, the good, bad, indifferent. It doesn't matter. The whole human being. of how you navigated and how you got there. And so, yeah, and some of that is looking at the flip side of the coin. And so the amount of hours that it would take to be with, with her and with her loved ones. I mean, she had over 100 people write character letters. The mitigation is there.
Yeah.
And it could be in those letters, but then it needs to be brought to the forefront in such a way where people can even listen and hear it. And then let's not get it twisted up here in how we think in our viewfinders and the filter that we're looking in. She's a pretty white lady.
Yeah.
In all of our viewfinder and all of our, like how we see, they could have flexed on that. And people don't like that answer, but it is the truth. And so sometimes we're looking at some of the inequities that are actually a strength in the criminal defense scenario and navigating a case. And sometimes those inequities though they are mitigating.
Yep.
We're looking at it from a different way. So it really just, depends. We're always, strength based in this business in each case, because it's the only way we can, win. It's the only way we can actually get justice for all.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I look at what happened there, I think the lawyers went by the book, just how we're taught in law school. Let's submit 1,000 pages of material, literally 1,000 pages of material for sentencing. Let's hit all the notes. Let's cite all the right cases in the memo about the guidelines, but the humanistic, the holistic element, it just wasn't there, and it always needs to be there. So, well, I've kept you a long time, so I think that we're getting close to the end. But I do want to, I mean, first I would say, hire a mitigation specialist. And Victoria, I don't think is doing a ton of hands-on work now. She's focused on teaching others and training others and doing mitigation university. But if you're in the area in Texas, you're still doing work locally. You're just not traveling that much. But I want to encourage people in general to hire mitigation specialists. You can get funding. First of all, if you're a public defender office, you better already have one on staff. It's time.
If you don't, get one, and I will help you have the best outcomes for the cases that mitigation specialist gets. I mean, it is on the job training. And then you need someone to mentor, to handhold, to be there, to be able to, call. That's one of the things that I think that I promote is that, you're in your mitigation business and you're working and you're doing the things. You need somebody that you can call and chat with or walk you through something right then on site.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is interesting because you mentioned this at the start. There's no credential, right? There's no school that you go to. There's no certification. You don't get a special badge that's, like the investigators do, or, the paralegal training. It's just, you're kind of
we're building it as we go.
Building
it. There will be mitigation schools someday.
Yeah.
That's the way that the world is, molding, is that we are going to be a lot more sentence focused and humanitarian in our efforts in the criminal justice system. That's what reform is all about, is looking at the human aspect. So we're going in that direction. And so in the meantime, public defenders offices or lawyers who take on incredibly challenging cases, you can call me, or you can call any mitigation specialist, and they'll tell you you can Google a job description for a mitigation specialist right now and hire someone and or create a job.
Yeah. So for these PD offices, you need to have at least one on staff. And then for the private lawyers, so we have contract lawyers who might have to go to the court for funding. Especially in federal court, mitigation specialists get funded now routinely. So go to the judge and ask for money. And if you're just a private lawyer, build it into your budget, because at the end of the day, this is going to make you look good, lawyer, because you're going to get a better result with a mitigation specialist always. And so we really need to start thinking about that now. There are going to be plenty of times in this, the way our system is designed, which is not to give lawyers the resources they need to do their job right, there's going to be times when hiring a mitigation specialist is not an option. So what would be your best practical advice? I can't get a mitigation specialist. You're not going to have 1,000 lawyers calling you for free advice. On my own, as a lawyer, basics, what can I do to start walking down that road of mitigation?
Well, you can get my book,
Okay, good.
or you can even copy things out of the book and you can give it to your client to read if they can read, and or their loved ones. You can say mom, dad, sister, brother. You're going to have certain conversations with them about just introducing them to mitigation and what's important. And I promise you, you're going to have one or two people who are going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know why he's like the way he is. They'll share and say, and then you are strengthening your own mitigation skill set just by asking those questions and getting that information. I mean, I wrote this book and I made it affordable so that attorneys can buy 10 copies and share it with their clients and their families. So then they can be a part of the process of knowing what the lawyer needs to be successful in sentencing.
Yeah.
And then also understanding like, hey, mom, I need these education records. I think that tell me about the school experience. What was going on at school? What kind of classes were they in? Who were their teachers? Do you remember their names? Certain things. If let's say we're trying to prove up intellectual disability, we need to know those kind of things, because intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, not being able to read, that is culpability. You can frame your brain around that. Lawyers, very brilliant human beings. So it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I could see where that might connect. And so, I mean, that's the thing. And maybe they're not going to be able to write letters, but somebody in the office might be able to help them and assist them. And lawyers are going to have to get over, if you can't afford a mitigation specialist, there's going to be some hand-holding there. And you are going to be the person to discern on who gets that energy from you and who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no right or wrong way. And where we are as a field of work in mitigation, people don't like this. However, something is better than nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times we're in triage mode. One of the simple things that we do, that I learned as a federal defender, was, when the file comes to us on day one, there's forms in that file, blank forms, and they're releases. They're releases for your medical information, for your whatever, school, psychological, you name it. And that's one of the first things I have clients do, is sign releases. I may never need them, but once I figure out that there might be an issue, I've got a sign release in the file that I can just send out. It's easy. And you get these records, right? And you start to, it's like 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. You're just starting to build, but the box is empty when you get the case. You got to fill the box with all the pieces, and then you got to put them together to make the big picture. So releases, and good news is I have giveaways in these podcasts. So in the show notes and the links and stuff, I'll have downloads. So I think I have releases, sample releases that you guys can download if you go to the show notes at setforsentencing.com. Of course, Victoria's book, you're going to find all of her stuff at heartofjustice.org. www.heartofjustice.org. If you go to her website, the first thing you're going to see is the handbook for mitigation right there on the homepage. What other practical, I'll give you some more practical advice, lawyers. Just mitigation. Start to ask these questions, ask easy questions. Don't just go to the police report and say, what is this fact? What is that fact? Did this happen? Is this right?
Please start there. Good point. Like I as a mitigation specialist, I never talk about the crime or the alleged crime unless the client brings it up. And I know that they'll want to with their lawyer, of course, but to say, hey, we can table this because I'm going to come back. They don't think that they're going to come back, but you really actually could, just in your best effort, visit the client 3 to 5 times in a short period of time. And then you're getting a little bit further and you're getting a certain amount of cooperation, because then they're on the phone with whoever mitigation witness is saying like, yeah, they came to see me. Yeah, they came to see me again. Yeah, they came to see me again.
Yeah,
And
they
the
trust
thing
you.
about interviewing is mirroring. You can watch a YouTube video about mirroring interviewing and put it to practice. So that way you are meeting them where they are, and whatever is important to them, you're sharing and reflecting similar subject matter to that, because that's how you are connecting, and just really trying to figure out, where am I a lot like this person? Where do we have similarities? Oh, they're a dad. I'm a dad. I have children, or, I was in sports, or I really like, said football team or whatever. I don't like art. What do you draw? How did you learn that? Where did you, and just try to keep it a bit, social and personal in the beginning.
Hmm.
And, you can say like, I haven't got all the discovery yet. I'm waiting to get the discovery. But in the meantime, how are you being cared for here? I'm going to request them the records from the jail. So they'll tell me if you're on medication or whatever, but is that working out for you? And then, have you been on medication before? Right. So those things are kind of opening up, and then you can ask follow-up questions to whatever they're already sharing. I
Yeah.
always stray away from and advise to stay away from direct questioning, because then you come across like a cop.
Hmm. Yeah. Yep. 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 And if you haven't done the groundwork to build the relationship and the trust, you can ask the question. You're not going to get the right answer anyway. One of the easiest things I do is the very first time I meet a client. A lot of times it's going to be, I don't have a lot of time because their court hearing's about to start, and I just got to get the basics. But I always say today is going to be rushed. I don't want you to think this is going to be like, this is what it's going to be like every time. It's just the way this process works. The judge is going to see you in 15 minutes. And I just wanted to introduce myself. We're going to have time, all the time that we need to talk, I
Yeah.
promise. And
Yeah.
I'll hear your story about the case and everything else. By the way, is there anybody I can call? Is there anybody you need me to call and let them know you're here and everything else? And
Right.
it's a way to just show you care, but it's also a way to start building a connection, because you need those allies, those resources that you talk about, who can actually carry the load for you and do some of that legwork if you don't have your own mitigation specialist.
Yes. Yes. And
So,
they say like, I need you to call my wife. I need you to call, my grandma. And, then that is, and when you actually do it, that's where you're building the rapport. When you do what you say you're going to do, then they see that you have integrity, because you're doing what you say you're going to do. And then that's really how the trust and the rapport starts to build. And so if you
mhm.
can do what you say you're going to do 5 or 6 times in a row, you are really gaining ground. And let me
Yeah,
tell you, once rapport is established, it is there forever.
yeah,
As long as you don't mess it up for the most part. But I mean, I had such a great, me and the attorney, with a very, very mentally ill client, a foundation of rapport. He goes, he is found incompetent. He goes to the hospital, and he stays there, and I kid you not, for 5 years, because he was never found competent again. And then he comes back to the county jail, and we meet him. We think he's going to be mad at us because he didn't want to go, to the hospital in the first place. But no, we still had rapport with
hmm,
someone who has serious mental illness.
yeah,
It was there, and it stayed
yeah,
there until
yeah.
we him or assisted, and he was found incompetent again.
Yeah. Okay, so other advice, sometimes will have my client, I will ask them to write me their story. Tell me their story. And not about the case. It's not about a statement about what happened about the case, but just your life story.
Yeah.
And it may be that they don't read or write so well. And so, but that's one way to find out real quick. But then also there's just so much, like you said, it's therapeutic for somebody to start thinking in those terms. But there's just gold in that story. A simple example, not a stupid example, but a simple example. I had a client who I represented, and he went to prison for a few years. It was a pretty serious assault on the reservation, and he got out of prison, and the day he got out, he got arrested again. And what happened was he was coming home to the reservation, and he had alcohol. He needed to drink. And but on the reservation it's illegal. You can't have alcohol. And he came across a tribal cop, and the tribal police officer searched him and found alcohol. So he pushed the police officer and ran. So now he's arrested on a probation violation and a new charge of assault on a police officer. It's a minor assault because he pushed him. He didn't do any real harm. But it's like, okay, so their story is unrepentant, recidivist criminal. He's not even out a day, and he's already drinking and beating up on a cop. So how you look at, yeah, you're cringing. For people who aren't watching the YouTube one, you're cringing. Anyway, flash forward, I'm like, tell me your story. And he wrote his story. And part of his story was about the last 3 years of his life, where he was sent to a maximum security federal penitentiary. And the first thing he saw was a fight in the lunchroom where somebody got stabbed. And the unbelievable amount of trauma that he experienced in the prison system. And then you get out of prison, you haven't really had much help or anything else. So you want to have a drink? Okay, I can understand that. And then you see, oh my God, I'm about to go back to prison because now a police officer is there. So it's that brain trauma, fight, flight, freeze. I'm not thinking. I'm going to push this cop and get the fuck out of Dodge. Right. Because the last thing I want in this lifetime is to be back in that hellhole. And the rational brain would say, well, I shouldn't be drinking alcohol because I might find myself in trouble. And God forbid, I push a police. That's not how these things work. That's not how your brain works. Point is, I would have never gotten there without the story, because there were details in that story that made me think, oh, that's what's going on here, you know? So you just never know. You never know.
Tell me about your last year of life. Mm-hmm. You know, and I mean, if it was like your client being in prison, and I mean, you might already have in your pocket about what happens to a person who has PTSD. You might already have in your pocket if they spent time in solitary confinement and what that does to the brain neurologically, and how the stressors in the brain, they get diminished because you're in confinement, like you're in by yourself, right? And so you might already have that stuff in your pocket, and then there's sharing in the way that they speak and their best written language, because I mean, if they can write at all, you're going to see their education level, you're going to see how they're spelling, you're going to see how what vocabulary that they use that you also can use. Yeah. And that builds connection, just being able to speak the same language. Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm blown away by how well written something is and how unbelievably intelligent and the vocabulary that you would not expect to see in this case or this client, or you've made assumptions,
I have a client who writes me ever so often, and I asked him if he would just please do print because his cursive is so beautiful and old English style. I don't know what he's saying sometimes.
And that's interesting too. To me, that says, oh, we need an evaluation. Who's writing an old English style? But then there's a whole story too. Like, okay, maybe they didn't graduate high school, but they're using words like viscosity, or like, I'm like, what? How do you what and why? Then it's just opening up a whole nother world that you need to be looking into. Like, how does someone this brilliant not graduate high school? Like, what's happening here? Let's talk about it. All right, my last big piece of advice. I don't know if you've heard of this, but I did a podcast episode early on. I wish I knew the episode, but I'll put a link in the show notes about Defense Map. Defense Map is a free online confidential mitigation questionnaire that clients fill out. Now, it's a little bit tricky when they're in custody because we got to get them in front of a computer, and it's like a long process, and it's a very thought-provoking process. And some attorneys will fill it out with them, but I think it's better they do it themselves because they're more apt to be open with just them and their thoughts. But that's free. That's a free resource for somebody who cannot afford an amazing mitigation specialist like Ms. Rusk. But so I'm going to put the link in the show notes, defensemap.com. And
Okay.
I'm going to give you the last word, besides saying heartofjustice.org, handbook for mitigation. And again, those links will be in the show notes. But what do we miss? What's the takeaway? What's your last thoughts?
I mean, my last thoughts are be the change that you want to see in the world. Don't worry, the money will come. As you know, an entrepreneur, when you see a problem, create a solution, because your money might come from that solution. And then you're doing, cases in a different way, because it's not, you're not financially bound in such a way. I think that we're in such a place in criminal justice now that the innovation needs to be there. And I do think that inventors, visionaries, entrepreneurs are bringing those things to the table. Also, some of the takeaways for me is, just the idea that, meeting your client where they are. We all know that, but also your attorney, also your mitigation specialist or your investigator or the judge, and be open to the idea of doing mitigation on those decision makers or the people that you're working with within your team. And being, the idea of holistic mitigation for criminal defense. Holistic criminal defense is that we're meeting everybody where they are, and we're humanizing anyone, anytime, any place. And that all is how we are restoring integrity in each case, and then bringing it into the courtroom. We've done our homework, and we do have a better storyline than the prosecutor. And so if you outwork the prosecutor and you have restored integrity and relationships between the attorney and the client, the attorney and the court, just having done, your homework, you will get the outcome that's a match.
Love it. Well, besides holistic, my favorite word from our time together is integrity. It came up a lot. You clearly bring that to the table in abundance. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for spending an hour and a half with me on this podcast. It was awesome. And I've plugged the website a few times, but Mitigation University. Go to the website and reach out to Victoria if you're looking to get into the mitigation specialist world, and check that out. That's a very great resource. And my autographed copy should be in the mail of the Mitigation Handbook for Mitigation. So I can't wait to read it. But thank you again, Victoria, for all you do. And hopefully we'll be talking soon.
Yes, I really would like that. Thank you for your time and for this beautiful platform, and that all you do. And I hope that, yes, you are set for sentencing. I love that.
Thank you. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.